Bullying. Have you ever been bullied at work? Have you ever bullied someone at work and didn't realise you were? So in this episode, we're joined by Carol Chidley. Carol reached out to us on social media and said, wouldn't bullying be a really good topic for you and Albert to discuss in the Leadership Detectives? And because Carol brought it up with us, we thought, well, let's invite her along. So in this episode, we're talking about bullying. What is it? How do you determine it? Is bullying something that means something to someone differently to someone else? Is bullying something that leaders should be concerned about? And when you do get bullying in the workplace, how do you deal with it? So we try and have this, a difficult topic to talk about, but we try and have this kind of conversation as we're going through this discussion today. So hopefully you'll find this useful and it'll give you some ideas and what to look out for and what to do if you do see bullying in the workplace. As always, please subscribe, please give us a thumbs up, please leave us your comments, especially on a topic like this. Okay, then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're live.
Hey, good morning. Welcome. Good to see everybody. Welcome back to Leadership Detectives. So here we are on, 11th of December, a couple of weeks to go before Christmas and enjoying everything that's happening here in the UK. Neil, good to see you. How are you?
I'm fabulous, thanks, mate. I'm aching a little bit from hitting golf balls with you yesterday, but I'm feeling good. And I'm also delighted to be joined by a special guest today. So a special guest joining the Leadership Detectives, Carol Chidley, an old colleague of ours from IBM. Welcome, Carol. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Enjoying the build up to Christmas and looking forward to it.
So I've got to ask, the first question I'm going to ask you actually is not what I was planning, but I've got to ask you about the cow behind you.
Oh, so my friend lives up in Scotland and you can walk from her house through the estates because you get free to roam up in Scotland. And we saw Highland cows and I just love the fact that they're just so messy and just so solid and just... yeah, enjoying life. So when I was up at the end,
I noticed on Zoom during lockdown that most people's hair started to look like that during lockdown the first time when there were no barbers around.
Yeah, I'm now getting very hair conscious, but yeah.
So this is a really special conversation for us because you reached out to us after seeing something online on LinkedIn, a story, and we'll go to that story in a minute, and said, this would be a really good topic for the podcast or the Zoomcast, and we basically said, well, why not come on and talk about it? So that's what we're going to talk about. But just so the audience gets to know you a little bit, mm-hmm. If you were a guest at your children's school or university or whatever, and you were being introduced onto stage to an audience of kids or students, how would you want to be introduced that would tell them about you?
Okay, depending upon the age. If it was the younger age, I'd say I'm probably a bit like Paddington, quite curious, very much wanting to respect people, and also really enjoying getting to know people. And I do have that little element of mischievousness and playfulness about me.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, fabulous. That's a great introduction. Okay. So why don't you tell us what made you kind of reach out to us and what we're going to talk about today?
Okay, so as you'll remember, a few weeks back, we had the Priti Patel in news incident. And what it brought up for me was there was a number of things going on within that story. There was the reaction of her team who felt that she was bullying them. And then there was also the reaction of her boss, which is Boris Johnson, in terms of him standing by her. So it brought up that whole question for me about bullying. Was he doing the right thing by standing by her? Was he being a loyal leader? And also, was she bullying, or was it to do with how her team were feeling impacted by the way she was trying to do do things and drive change within her organisation. So that's what it brought up for me, and that's why I thought, as a leader, it's a brilliant topic to be curious about.
There's an extra dynamic in that story though as well, Carol, right? Because there was also a review or an investigation.
Yes.
And that threw up a report
Mm-hmm.
that went back to, as we call it here, her boss. Right?
Yes.
So I guess we should consider that as well in that angle, right? Because I think the word you used is, did her boss stand by her?
Yes.
Does that mean he disregarded the report?
Ooh, good question. Certainly the way that the report was presented in the press came across as she had been bullying. And then in terms of the way that Boris was presented, it was very much a case of he'd read the report, heard what it had to say, and at the same time still said, no, I'm not asking her to resign. So therefore, whether consciously or unconsciously, he was standing by that behaviour.
Yeah. So, and I think it's probably worth at this point, just because this topic of bullying is, you know, we put a few posts out on social media and got mass reaction around this. So it's a very emotional topic, and everyone's got an opinion on it. Everyone's got a judgment on it. And I pulled up yesterday, so I'm just going to read this. It's a short paragraph on the Health and Safety Authority and how they define workplace bullying. So just to give us a baseline to talk from. So what it says is repeated inappropriate behavior, direct or indirect, whether verbal, physical or otherwise, conducted by one or more persons against another or others at the workplace and or in the course of employment, which could reasonably be regarded as undermining the individual's right to dignity at work. This is really interesting. An isolated incident of the behavior described in this definition may be an affront to dignity at work, but as a once-off incident is not considered to be bullying. So if it's only once, it's not considered bullying. If it's ongoing, it's bullying. And so with Priti Patel, what did you take out of what she did that constituted bullying when they went through that analysis and they went through that review?
So rather than just concentrating on that particular incident, to me, what you've just referred to there is brilliant, because it talks about the repetition. And to me, that's what microaggressions are. They are that repetition. And excuse me, I'm losing my voice today. And that combination that builds up on each day and basically bring a person into a stress state of mind.
Yeah. And
that's really important, because if it's, as you say, if it's a one-off, then you can go, okay, that's out of character. It's not, maybe something else is going on. It's an off day. We'll put it to one side. If it's a case of repeated, and what you're beginning to feel within yourself, if you're the person being bullied, is almost a heightened sense of anxiety whenever you're coming into contact, then that to me is really dangerous. That's where we're getting into that really. It's not good for the leader, and it's not good for the person receiving it, because no one's going to be productive in that environment.
You know the thing I struggle with in this stuff, because you're right, Carol, and if it's repeated and if it's happening all the time. But when I did some grievance training, one of the things they told us during that training was, it has nothing to do with your intention. It's to do with the way it's received. Now, I personally got a bit of a problem with that, because if I don't have any intention to offend, bully, attack you, and you feel that I did, that's seen as me failing, right? But I get that. And so that's for me to apologize and do what I should. But how do you feel about that, about intention versus receipt?
Okay, so for me, if the impact is disempowerment, and it's very difficult, because if you're sat opposite someone and you ask them to do something, and you're doing that because you're getting asked to do something, and you don't necessarily have enough time to go, look, I appreciate it's above and beyond, da, 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 and you just pass that straight on, then that person will then go, ugh. And if that's happening repeatedly, then that's really bad, because of the fact that it is that heightened sense. And this to me is where, and actually I think it was you, Albert, that pointed me to this. It's that whole piece of, when you're a leader, the importance of knowing your team, even if that means you break some of the rules around what you think being a manager is all about. It's about making sure that when you're sat with the person, and I say sat, I mean, nowadays it's across Zoom or whatever, but when you're with your team, do you know the human in front of you? Do you know what actually drives them and encourages them and brings out the best in them? Or are you making lots of assumptions?
That's really interesting, Carol, because that leads me to think you could do or say something to an individual who could feel bullied.
Yes.
But you could do or say the same something to someone else and they don't.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's an interesting one then. So how does that play out then in determining whether someone is being bullied or not? Because that's about how the person receives it. But then I suppose there's an expectation thing as well. I was in the military for 12 years. So in the military, and you're on parade in a parade ground, and you get out of step on the parade, you can expect that your sergeant major is going to shout at you, call you a stupid little sniveling idiot, and tell you that you're useless and pathetic, and you need to sort yourself out. You kind of expect that.
But you're undermining me.
You consider that as bullying. You consider that as that's being in the military.
Yeah, Neil, you're undermining me in front of my colleagues. I mean, that's not acceptable, right?
Yeah. Well, right? It's part of the process, isn't it? So it's a really difficult topic, though, isn't it? So it's how's it received?
Yes.
And what occurs to me is and this was interesting article in The Sun about this topic. So, The Sun, one of the stand-up papers in the UK, it says, was Priti Patel a bully, or is it just a word lazy gits use to dodge criticism?
Yeah.
So I thought that was it's a really interestingly argued article about her shouting and screaming at civil servants saying they were useless, because they weren't driving through the change she needed. I mean, she did use the F word by the look of it quite a lot. So was that necessarily over aggressive? But that's an interesting one as well, isn't it? So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a word that lazy gits used to dodge criticism?
Well, to me, it wasn't the lazy gits one, because it was the useless, because that becomes quite personal. Because rather than talking about the act, as in you didn't do a good job on that, you're then actually making it very personal and much more about who they are. And to me, if you're in a position, if you are looking around and you're looking at everyone around you and you're saying they're useless, they're useless, they're useless, is that right? Maybe it's time to look in the mirror and actually go, what is it that is out of line here? Because I think everyone around me is useless. What is it that I need to change in myself that I can interact better?
Yeah. Great point.
And actually, we talked about we've actually done a podcast on a book called Extreme Ownership, and we talked about it on the interview we did last with Carmina Lees. In Extreme Ownership, basically what Jocko Willink talks about, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, is if something's not going right in your team, in your department, in your organization, it's down to you. It's not down to anyone else, it's down to you. So I think that's an important, so, you know, when we were talking earlier about, so how do you get a team to work better that isn't delivering? Well, one of the ways you do it is you look at yourself. You know, what are you not doing to not inspire or not instruct or not give people the information they need to stop being useless? If you think they're useless, have they not got the skills? Have they not got the right objectives or the right instructions? Or maybe they're not the right people. And actually the best thing is go and put them somewhere where they could thrive.
Yeah. And whatever those things were was probably your responsibility to have had in place, right?
Yeah. And there's an organisation called the Arbinger Institute. I know about them because they wrote a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. They've then brought out other books as well, but they bring out some really brilliant points about how, as a leader, you need to basically think about the people around you, and through doing that, that'll bring about the right sorts of behaviours, because you're no longer coming at it from a point of me. It's about going out, having an outward mindset, and through that you'll actually have some really great relationships and interactions, and actually bring about the best in everybody around you.
So I guess there's the first leadership lesson in this is it's kind of linked to bullying, but it's more about, you know, look at you first. If your team are feeling bullied, which I guess you might not be the first person to know that, but if they feel you're being bullied, then, or you're feeling so frustrated you start shouting at your team, look at yourself first. One of the things I was going to bring up, so slightly just taking a slightly different angle, because one of the things I noticed in a corporate, when I was in a corporate, but also in companies I work with, is the more senior you are, the more pressure comes on you. And actually, I think the more bullying goes on at a more senior level. And I don't know whether, I mean, Carol, what's your thoughts on that?
It's a really difficult position to be in, because, you know, there's almost like an expectation that as you get more senior in the organisation, the amount of things that you are committing to do and you are responsible for increase. And then there's also the aspect of, should you actually be absorbing that, and then you filter out what goes down to the people around you, so that you ensure that even though you may be getting a lot of pressure, you don't necessarily bring that into your team. What you actually do is recognize the strengths within your team and play to those and get them to help support you in the best way.
I'd offer that should be irrelevant of your seniority. I'd offer that as a leader, it may be your responsibility to be a buffer and to absorb some of that. But it's interesting that you say when you get more senior, is that part of the package then? Does the package actually say salary, bonus, stock options, regular bullying and harassment?
You know, I'll give you a real example. So, you know, I worked for a business partner for a couple of years, and they were bought by a venture capitalist. And the venture capitalist just wants to drive profit out of business. I was told monthly, because I ran a division there, that if I didn't hit my number, I'd be sacked the next month. That's because these guys are trying to, and I've seen in shareholder meetings, shareholders are saying to chief execs, miss your quarterly number this quarter, we're going to vote you out. So is that bullying, or is that just being held to account for your role and your responsibility?
Yeah, is that a condition of satisfaction for your job? A condition of satisfaction is you must achieve this, if not, you don't deserve that job anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think, Carol?
It was interesting because I mean, when you relayed that story then, Neil, it took me back to, blimey, about 20 years ago, when I actually had that whole thing of, if you do not have this in place, it wasn't necessarily my job on the line, but there was the potential impact at what it could mean to the team around me. And I felt very personally responsible. So you're right, it's not just about where your level within the company or seniority. I think it's about your personal responsibility and how much of that you take on. However, the flip side of that is, if you are attached to that job, to that lifestyle, whatever it is that comes with that, then when you get those threats, they actually become much more impactful. And that's where the stress, the fear, and everything else like that comes into it. And actually, that's where it then feels more like bullying. Because actually, if someone threatens you and you're like, fine, I can walk out of this job, I can go and get another one, then actually it doesn't feel like bullying. You may still do all the things they're asking because you personally want to do a good job or you feel personally responsible, but you won't feel the same pressure unless you're attached to it.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I mean, at that particular time in my life, I had 2 kids, 3 years old and 1 year old, and just a moved house, big mortgage, you know, all that kind of stuff. So there was a certain and a pressure to want to do a great job as well, and and want to succeed. But I think everybody feels that nobody wants to be threatened, no matter what level you are. But at some people might not see it as a threat. They might just see it as pointing out your weaknesses or pointing out your failures in your role.
Yeah. And I think that that's really important in terms of where you as a person are, how confident you are, what sort of self-esteem you have. And from that then has a big impact in terms of how you receive what's being asked of you, and also the tone of what's being asked. Because, you know, you can say the same question to someone and say, please, can you do this? Or you can say, please, can you do this? So even things that you'll be much more aware of the tone being used, you'll be much more aware of what's being asked of you, depending upon what expectations you have and also what's going on around you.
Yeah.
I think we shouldn't lose track of what Neil put up earlier on about the Health and Safety Authority's definition, right? So which could reasonably be regarded as undermining the individual's right to dignity at work. Right? You have to believe that if you're a leader, you must have personal perception of the effect you're having on an individual.
Yes.
Come on, you're a leader of people. If you can't recognize the effect you're having on somebody, then you need to go on some development, or you need to be doing a different job. Maybe go join sales. Right? It's really important that we recognize that if somebody says, I didn't know I was having that effect, something needs to be done to make sure that next time you would know that you're having that effect. So either they need to indicate to you, right? Or you, but I just struggle with the fact that a leader doesn't have the perception. Look, we won't always spot it. You might just miss the signals, right? But if someone's crying in the corner, there's a reasonable chance they weren't comfortable with what you just said to them, right? Now, it might be more subtle than that. You might not notice it. It comes back to this repeated thing. If it just happened as a one-off, extra pressure on me this quarter, I'm getting some extra grief, and I lashed out. That's wrong, but I did. But if I lash out monthly and weekly, that's beyond, right?
But that brings up a really interesting point. So we know about the Johara's window of, so everybody has things that they know about themselves and everybody else knows about them. There'll be things that are blind spots to them. So do they have the support around them so that if they aren't aware of the impact that they're having, even if the person themselves can't come directly to them, can other people come to them to say, are you aware of what you're doing there? You know, you might want to rethink that. Do they have that sort of support, either from the team, their peers, or even from their bosses, to help make sure that they are aware of their impact?
So I think there's definitely, you know, one of the thoughts going through my head actually is that some of the leaders that I've worked in who you would put in the bullying category haven't got a clue they're doing it. There's no self-perception there. They're just that kind of character where they just want everybody else to feel inferior, but they don't think of it as bullying. Or they would call themselves pace setters, and everybody needs to keep up with me.
Yeah.
I'd just like to take this down a slightly different angle as well, just to bring in another element to this conversation. So if that's okay, one of the things as a leader, because this is all about leadership clues. So if you let's say you have a manager within your organization who's accused of bullying by their employees, and you get HR to do an investigation or whatever the process is, and then that gets presented to you as a leader, how do you think that should be handled?
So there's a number of things that come up for me for that. One, I think it's very important to be seen to be acting on what's been fed back to you, so that it's not, there is a perception of this is not acceptable behaviour. Even if it was unintended, we do not want our employees to feel stressed and fearful when they come into the workplace. That isn't what we want. So one, it's be seen to be acting on it. Secondly, there's a case of how can you support the individual or individuals who feel bullied? What is it that they need in place to help support them?
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly, for the person who's been accused of the bullying, what is it that they need? Is it because for me, if it's a case of they've been unintended impact, is it a case of actually it's to do with their style and the match of their style with the team that they're working with? Because you can have mismatches. So it's all of those different things. And then you may not be able to solve it overnight, but what I think is really important is that you're seen to be receptive to what's been shared with you. You're seen to be acting on it, even if you can't necessarily fix it straight away. You've got an action plan in place, which you are communicating with everybody around you to say, this is what we're doing about it.
So I like those three categories, actually. That's a really good way of describing it. And so there's a couple of things come up with that in my mind. So if you don't act on it, firstly, it says it's okay.
Yes.
Secondly, it says the HR process is being undermined, because what's the point in doing it, bringing an independent person in to look at it? And thirdly, if someone's got a grievance or feels bullied in the future, and maybe in another team or something, they're not going to bring it up because they know nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's and in this particular situation, I think all of those things happened. Yes. You know, that wasn't acted on. We actually did a Zoom cast about Boris Johnson, comparing him to Donald Trump. And one of the things he was poor at, in our view, when we did the comparison, was strong leadership in terms of the way he managed people. You know, we saw it with Dominic Cummings, and we're seeing it. You know, we see it with this particular situation. From what we can see in the press and everything, we don't know the exact facts. Yeah. So I think that's a really good point about acting on what's been fed back. Albert, go on. I'll let you we'll move on to point two.
No, yeah, because the other point that Carol made was about, is it the right person in the right role? And let's just make an example, right? Maybe the way that you would, and guys, whether you're in sales or delivery, I apologize, right? It's just an example. Maybe the way you would speak to salespeople, you could do in a certain way because they are driven by certain styles that you couldn't speak to somebody in an administrative setting or in a call center setting or in a whatever, right? A different style. So I think that's right. Now, does that mean only certain people can do certain jobs? Yeah, there's nothing the matter with that. There's nothing the matter with that. To say, if you're a really good sales manager, maybe you'd never be a good administrative manager. That's okay. What's the matter with that? Just because I'm a good footballer doesn't mean I'll be a great golfer, right? So I think it's fair to say maybe we have got square pegs in round holes, and it's coming out in the way that they're acting because the audience they're working with, which is their team, it doesn't work for them. So we should recognize that. But that has to be the boss's job. That has to be the person's job. And there is a responsibility back on the person being bullied to speak up. I know it's difficult, but to our audience here, guys, we're going to try and get that out as we go through this. And I know we're using a lot of time here, but we need to give you some tips on what do you do if you find yourself in this situation. What do you do? So we'll try and wrap that up before we go.
Yeah.
But I think you've got a responsibility as an individual, because if that person doesn't know they're having that effect, if you don't tell them, like Neil says, they'll keep doing it. It's
Definitely.
approved. It's approved, right?
Yeah. And I think building on what you've just said there, Albert, there's the context as well. Because if you've come in and your job is to bring about change, and you've got to bring about change which needs to happen quickly, and it's not going to be well received, then you may get perceived as bullying and driving this change, even though it's going to happen anyway. So there's that whole thing of, are you open to listening to the people around you so that they can try and help bring about that change? Or if we believe what was put in the press in terms of Patel, it was very much a case of being undermined. There was a number of incidents where she was being undermined because and the way that it's presented is it was a case of the team weren't ready for that sort of change.
Yeah, I didn't actually pick it up, and maybe we know here, right? But I understand she walked out of her office and said, "You are effing useless." Now, did she say that to an individual, or did she make that as a statement to her department, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make it any better that she said that you were effing useless, but it does make a difference as to whether I said, "Carol, you, while everybody else is watching, are this," or "Team, this is what you're doing," right? Do we know? Was that a general address? Or
I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know.
Do we think there's a difference there?
So to me, there's a number of differences. One, if it's personal, and personally, I don't like the phrase telling someone they're useless. I think you talk about the act, not the person. If you are going to use the word useless, then it's very much a case of it should be done in a closed office. I think calling someone out in a public environment like that is completely wrong. And then there's the fact of sort of what we touched on earlier. If you're calling the whole team useless, then again, look in the mirror because something's wrong. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a really good point. If it's the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So you're, as a boss, you've got a manager that's bullying, and you've done a report, and he's come back to you. So there are a number of actions you could take. You could sack the manager, if it's really bad, and or whatever the context is. You could move them to another role if they're a good person, but just not good in that role. But I guess there's also a place where you could try and make this work. So you could get the leader and the team together and go, let's work out how we can make this. It's like a marriage counseling session, how could we make this work together? Do you want to make it work together? Do you want to take this forward together? And then what type of training, coaching, mentoring do you need going forward to support you in keeping that going?
Yeah,
I guess that would be my approach, because I kind of like to have a collaborative approach whenever I have anything like this.
Yeah,
I think the important thing though is, are all parties involved open to working at it?
Yeah.
Because if that's not in place, if people aren't open to being collaborative, then it's not gonna happen.
No, and that's got to be down to the second line, third line, or whatever it is, to create that safe environment.
Yeah.
So that the team feel comfortable being able to say what they need to say, and the boss feeling comfortable that they feel the manager, whoever is involved, being comfortable. So no, it's a really interesting topic. So are there any, when we started this conversation, Carol, were there any things that you really wanted to get out that we haven't got out through some of the questions we've been asking?
I think we've touched on a lot of the things. So it's about, is what you're saying perceived as constructive or destructive? Mm-hmm. What language are you using? Because let's be honest, the language you use defines a lot of behaviour, and also how it's perceived. Is it happening repeatedly? And then are you, as a leader, seeing the people in front of you? Now, that's all very much a case of focusing on the leader, looking at the other side of it as the person who may be feeling bullied. If you're in a position where you've got the impact of feeling disempowered, or you've got shame or fear because you've got an attachment and you are worried about the potential loss of job or prestige or whatever it may be, if you're in a position, because let me just take a step back. If you're feeling shame or fear, then that's very much an internal process. So therefore, it's really important to recognize the fact that other people around you may not necessarily be feeling that same thing. So while you're in a position where you can take a step back, recognize what's going on, and then actually reconnect to the power that you have within yourself. Now, in that particular situation, you may not be able to.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in a position to act on it, please do. It's really important that if you feel that you are being bullied or you feel that you're being triggered in any way, share that with your manager, leader, or with your peers so that it can be acted on. If you're not able to in that particular circumstance, what things do you need to put in place so that doesn't happen again? So that way you're learning from it, and you're then in the position of trying to help put the boundaries in place so that you won't have that feeling of being bullied in the future. Those are the main things I wanted to get out.
I think the key thing that in all the stuff that you said there, and there's some great advice there, Carol, and I'm sure for some people this would be quite overwhelming, right? But I think the key thing is doing nothing isn't the answer, right? So you've got to do something, and the minimum you've got to do is you've got to talk to someone. Now, great to talk to the person who you feel is bullying you, but if you really feel you cannot face that, you've got to talk to somebody else. Now, that could be a peer, that could be HR, that could be your partner, but your partner's not going to help fix it at work, right? So you've got to take action if you want it to change. If you want it to change, right? And that's probably the best piece of advice we can give to somebody here, is you've just got to talk to somebody and share that with someone to get a view and to make sure someone else knows it's happening. They might put a spin on it that makes you see it differently, by the way. I'm not saying it approves what's been happening, but you might be seeing something strangely, right? Or they might go, you're dead right. Guess what? That person does it to me as well, right? Yeah. And then you can feel you've got an ally in your cause as well, right? Not you now going to hang someone, but you now don't feel it's just you, right?
Yes.
But so the key thing is talk to someone.
Yeah.
It's such a big topic, this, actually, and we could probably go on for another hour easily talking about it. And so let's kind of wrap up, shall we, with a few quick fire.
Can I just come back and ask one quick question?
Yeah, go on, mate. Yeah.
Carol, was Priti Patel bullying anyone?
Oh.
In your opinion, was she a bully? In your opinion? For this call, by the way, guys, it's Carol's opinion, right?
Okay. By calling people, as opposed to the act, useless, then yes.
Okay.
Because it makes it personal.
And anyone listening that doesn't agree with that, that's your opinion, right? That's
Yes.
Carol's opinion, and that's how sensitive this topic is.
And by the way, we've seen some bullying on social media around this topic because someone didn't agree with someone. Yeah. So you do have to be you'd have to check yourself before you start looking at other people as well.
Yeah. So you're right, Neil. Let's do some quick fire.
Yeah, let's do a couple of quick fire. Shall I go first? You want to go first?
No, you shoot.
Okay, so you've actually mentioned a book already, Carol, Leadership and Self-Deception. But if you were going to recommend a book to leaders that are listening to this Zoomcast, what would you recommend?
My other favourite book is The 4 Agreements.
4 Agreements?
Yes.
Okay. Who's that by?
Don Miguel Ruiz, I think. And it's split into 2 parts. A lot of people may struggle with the first part, so it's not obligatory to read that, but definitely take the time to read all about the 4 agreements. The things that really come out for me is don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, and be impeccable with your word and such. So yeah.
Right. Okay. I've not heard of that, so I'll have a look at that. Go on, Albert, you go next.
So if we're looking at this whole thing about bullying, I'm sure you've seen situations where it's happened, situations where it hasn't. Have you got a role model that you would want to identify here as someone who would handle this stuff well?
Repeat the question, please, Albert.
Have you got a role model in leadership that you would identify as managing well their behavior and not being bullying or managing a bullying situation?
This is going to sound a bit sycophantic, but when we were working together, I always felt that you embodied that. You were always very receptive to feedback, and it was very much a case of listening to what was going on for the individual. And I remember being on a call with you and you went, Carol, just tell me about that, because I was relaying my personal opinion, and you were like, no, I want to know more about that. Whereas that could have easily just been brushed aside. Okay. So that to me was really important. Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you. Neil.
Okay. What would be one major must do and one major must not do for leaders when it comes to this topic of bullying?
One major must do is build your self-awareness. Okay. Because the more you build your self-awareness, the more you become aware of how you are, and also more about your impact, intended and unintended. The major must not do for me, I think, is if you're feeling a lot of pressure, take the time to take a step back so that you don't share that onwards and outwards to your team, and also recognize if it's happening repeatedly, because actually if it's happening repeatedly, there's something out of kilter.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. So let's have one more. Albert, shall we?
What about a quote? Do you think there's a quote anywhere around this topic that would stick in someone's head that would help them? Have you got a quote from anywhere?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. It's just, if it was something there, then that would have been good. But I think one of the things I would put as the one-liner is, guys, don't do nothing but talk to someone. All right.
Yes.
That's probably the best. No, I think
should we kind of wrap up there?
Yeah. I'm going to take Neil's stage this time, guys. So please, thank you very much for joining us, guys. Before we thank Carol overall, let me just say, guys, please give us your comments, give us your feedback. This is a very emotional topic, but we'd love to hear what you think as well. So give us your comments, give us your likes, give us your ratings on the podcast. And if you're not subscribed already, then please hit the button down there and subscribe. Neil and I got some more work planned for the next few days. 11th of December now. We've got some planned over the rest of December and into the new year. So if you've subscribed, then obviously you'll get notification of that. So thank you very much for joining us. Neil, I'll leave you to close with Carol.
Okay, Carol, I'll let you have any closing words you'd like to make.
A huge thank you, because it was absolutely brilliant in terms of being able to share with you that something that made me feel really passionate, and also Neil, you making me act on it as well. So thank you for actually making me do that. And it's just brilliant to get the opportunity to work with you both again. So thank you so much.
No, thanks, Carol. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for bringing this topic up, because it's a great topic, and and really appreciate you spending the time on this. And just a message out to everybody: anybody's got a topic they want us to talk about, let's get you on the podcast, the Zoomcast, to chat about it, because these are all really useful. And if one person takes away a little something and changes it and makes them a better leader, then that's great by us. So
Carol, you've still got a young family with you there, so have a fantastic Christmas.
Yes,
enjoy the days that are coming up, and thank you again for joining us.
Just talking about Chris, just one last thought. Actually, I had a picture in my head as you were talking about bullying, and I had this picture of elves in a factory with Father Christmas standing there shouting at them that they're useless. But I'll leave that with you as we now close. But great to see you all. Cheers. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you all. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.